You found us on YouTube. I'm proud. I'm glad that you're doing that. We are here every day, Fox 26 YouTube channel, updating you on what's going on in the tropics. I'm meteorologist John Dawson, and today maybe you've returned to work the day after Labor Day. Hopefully you had the day off, got a little bit of a break. We are here, whether it's a holiday or not, whether it's a weekend or not, on YouTube, bringing you the latest of what's happening in the tropics. And as I've been saying the last couple of days, there's plenty to talk about. And we're thankful, though, that it's all out in the Atlantic and not really close to the U.S. coastline, and especially, again, we're a little biased for those folks here in the Houston area that we're not seeing anything in the Gulf of Mexico. But sort of the main system that we're watching continuing to strengthen is Tropical Storm Earl. I was going to be really questionable whether or not it was going to be a tropical storm this afternoon or whether it was going to get itself enough organized to become a hurricane. And it looks like with some of the information from the hurricane hunters, not quite to hurricane status, at least with the 4 p.m. update from the National Hurricane Center. So Earl is still a tropical storm. So going over things, the winds about 70 miles an hour. So that's really close to that 75 that we're looking for. The movement is still not very fast, crawling at around 5 miles an hour. And the pressure is still in the mid 90s is kind of where we're looking at the moment. So forecast for Earl does expect it by tomorrow afternoon to become a Category 1 hurricane, maximum sustained winds around 80 miles an hour, then continuing to strengthen as it approaches Bermuda. So when I talk about, there's not a whole lot of threats with this. If you're in Bermuda, you probably are well aware of what's happening. So yes, definitely the folks in Bermuda are concerned with what is happening with Earl and how strong it's becoming, and even increasing more by the time it gets to Friday, expecting 125 mile an hour winds, sustained winds. That's going to be a Category 3, speeding up as it gets into Saturday and weakening back down to a Category 2, and then quickly going to fall apart once we get to the end of the weekend. So that's the official forecast track for Earl from the National Hurricane Center. And we've continued to watch Earl and the fact that it's brought a lot of rain to Puerto Rico. And what we're talking about as far as those rain bands kind of stretching down around still somewhat, I don't really think that's as much of an issue so much now as far as what Earl is creating. But you'll notice we've got a little plane here flying around on the screen. That, of course, are the hurricane hunters. This is one of the Air Force's aircraft that flew that storm during the day today. You can kind of see that track that they make. And if you're not familiar with how the hurricane hunters work, typically, the Air Force planes, at least, they take off out of Biloxi, Mississippi, but they're able to kind of move and have some sort of satellite points where they can refresh their fuel and kind of work out of a little bit. And they have one in the U.S. Virgin Islands, so that's where this took off from earlier in the day today. And then they fly into the storm, and they make kind of a crisscrossing pattern, that's sort of X-like, as they move through their different angles and different ways. When they don't necessarily have a real clear center of circulation, they're trying to sort of find that. They're trying to find that most lowest pressure reading, and they're looking, and sometimes that can be easier than others as they're flying around, but they'll fly this unique pattern as they're moving through, looking for that very low pressure, looking for maximum sustained winds, looking for an eye of the storm if it has one, and all along they're gathering data throughout the whole trip as far as the different parts of Earl and what it looks like, and the different pressures and winds and how much rain and on all those different things that you can think of. They're gathering that data and they're sending that up to the satellites as they're gathering it and chomping into the supercomputers, and it helps to create those computer models that we're using the Hurricane Center will use for that official forecast. So that's what these folks are doing, and really could spend a whole 30 minutes talking about the hurricane hunters and all that they do. But that's what happened earlier today. So that data that they gathered helped the Hurricane Center create that forecast that we just saw, plus again officially identifying it still as a tropical storm and not necessarily a hurricane. So not looking at that really well-defined eye that's really popping through, but you can see a little bit of that circulation that it's taking place, and a lot of that rain happening to the northeast and over to the east as well, as far as what Earl looks like. All right, shifting gears, let's talk about Danielle for just a moment. Danielle is a hurricane, and while Earl is continuing to grow and become stronger and perhaps even better organized, Danielle's doing the opposite. It is still, again, have some pretty good rotation to it, and it looks fairly organized on the satellites, but with that cooler water that's beginning to move into, we're expecting it to continue to weaken a bit. So Danielle is pretty far north when you kind of look at the bigger picture of things, and we take a look at that forecast track on what we're expecting. It's going to continue to maintain its hurricane strength probably for another maybe 24 hours, and then watch how it does this little loop right here. So I went ahead and took off some of the times off of our icons here because I thought it just got too crazy of a graphic to try to explain it to you, but to sort of be able to look at it. So basically tomorrow afternoon we're still at Category 1 hurricane, and then we'll see what happens once we get into Wednesday, and then, that's Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. Maybe I should have left some of these times still on here. Friday, then we're going to get to Saturday here, and then we're over here to Sunday, and again, winds way down to 40 miles an hour at this point, and maybe losing some of its tropical characteristics altogether. So Danielle, bottom line, the shortened story is beginning to fall apart and continuing to really just be a concern for any of those ships that are moving across the Atlantic. Not really going to impact very many land masses for sure. So I want to pause for just a minute and sort of talk about the fact that this is September, and we're looking at the peak. We're beginning to reach that peak of hurricane season. Just because we get to that September 10th mark, it doesn't mean that all of our concerns are over. It just sort of means that's when we would see the most activity typically happening, historically speaking. We're going to see that sort of move down. And again, if you're in the Houston area or the Texas coastline, we know that there are plenty of landfalls that have taken place in September, although historically speaking, the numbers show us that it's less likely to happen. But we could certainly name some examples of plenty of storms that have made landfalls in September. But those next 5 days or so, it just doesn't look like anything's going to happen in the Gulf of Mexico for sure. And again, for us here in Houston or anywhere along the Gulf Coast, that is great news, but anyone could really see those happening. So we've been talking about the Atlantic Basin all along, and that graph especially I showed you is for the Atlantic Basin. I haven't talked about the Pacific in a couple of weeks, so I just kind of want to touch on it real quick before we wrap things up, because there is a hurricane that's been out there for a little while. We just kind of skipped over it with so much to talk about in the Atlantic, but it's K. So Hurricane K is still with us and it's still going to strengthen, and the Baja Peninsula is actually under some tropical storm warnings as well as some hurricane watches, as we do expect K to approach the peninsula and probably even become a Category 2 hurricane. So as we kind of get a better look at here, this forecast track just a little bit. Currently a Category 1 hurricane. Those maximum sustained winds are at 85 miles an hour. Movement is a little brisk, about 15 miles an hour to the northwest. So tomorrow in the afternoon, strengthening enough to become a Category 2 storm, maintaining that Category 2 strength, and then things will weaken once we get towards the end of the week back to a tropical storm. So again, this looks like definitely going to be something for an impact in Mexico there on the Baja Peninsula, and we'll see if that's going to actually touch and make a landfall, or just those conditions are expected. So remember, when you have a watch or a warning, it's not saying a landfall is going to necessarily happen. And this, again, of course, works for anywhere in the Atlantic or the Pacific. It's saying that those conditions are expected within 24 hours if you're talking about a warning. So where we see the blue, that's the tropical storm warning. So tropical storm force winds could be expected within the next 24 hours for this portion of the peninsula, and then a yellow representing that hurricane watch, which is again a little bit further out, 36 hours. So that's kind of just a reminder again on those watches and warnings, kind of how that's all laid out. Hey, I've been really impressed, and it's been fun to have some folks reach out to me on social media. Now, if you want to leave a comment below, I'm trying to get back in here occasionally and look at those comments below here on YouTube. If I leave a comment, you can see where my YouTube channel is, and you can follow my YouTube channel as well. It's not quite as easy as John Dawson Fox 26. It's meteorologist John Dawson. It's a little harder to find, but look below for me leaving comments to other people's comments. And if you want to follow me on YouTube. Well, that would be fantastic. I'd love a few more subscribers there as well, and that way you can see those hurricane preparedness segments that I put out, the hurricane gear test. But if you want to reach out to me on social media, that's fantastic as well. Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, at John Dawson Fox 26. It'd be great to connect with you. All right, that'll do it for today. As I mentioned, we're here every day. We'll expect to see you clicking on YouTube again tomorrow.